Hi, this is Jake Adams, CEO at Simplify EDU.
And I'm Danielle Griggs, a tutor coordinator at Simplify EDU, and you're listening to Educators at Heart.
This podcast is for parents and students interested in peering behind the curtain to get to know the authentic journey we're all on as students of life.
Every week, we'll interview a different educator we know so that they can share the unique experiences that have shaped their perspective on the most important things students should know on their journey to higher education. Let's get started. Hey everyone, today we have an exciting episode that I'm thrilled to share with you all. We will be diving into the hot topic of artificial intelligence in education. I'm joined today by Meg Allen, who was with us last week, and the one and only Jake Adams. We discuss so many things today, from advancements in AI over the past decade, pros, cons, out-of-the-box ways to utilize this tool, and ways to really help set your students up for success in navigating the implementation of AI into their educational framework. Jake and Meg also share some great resources in this episode, which we've attached for you in the show notes as resources to check out. All right, so buckle up and let's jump on in. So we're thrilled to have Jake and Meg with us today. Thank you guys so much for doing this. I'm excited to kind of dive in today and talk about artificial intelligence, specifically in education, and hear from both of you guys, your each unique perspectives, and kind of get some information from you guys and just some help in navigating this, which I think is something that is very relevant to our families and our students right now. So I guess kind of first, let's start with what sparked your interest in AI. Meg, so we'll start with you. What sparked that for you? Where did this interest come for you?
So I'm a computer science major, which means this is kind of more relevant in my field, but I remember specifically about 2 years ago, I TA'd a intro to computer science class, and one of my students came up to me and showed me specifically ChatGPT and how that worked. And I had never seen it before, and I was blown away, as most students and professors would have been. And then that kind of brought it into the forefront of my mind, and I wanted to learn more. And so something I started learning more about AI was something so niche as like my Whoop app, which brought together all your personal data, and they had something called the Whoop Coach, and it would be an AI that broke down all of your metrics and turned it into how can I show what you should do today, and or how can I answer your questions, which I thought was super cool.
Wow. Yeah, that is super cool. So for Jake, what sparked your interest in AI? Where did this come from for you?
I would say I've been, very into it from way back when, like kind of before it was more mainstream, but it was like more like kind of out of sci-fi, just like mainly in the realm of fiction, specifically like one thing that comes to mind is like Iron Man from like the Marvel movies, and how he had Jarvis, who basically like understood everything about him because through sensors and cameras and everything, he was collecting all this data and then able to give him intelligent answers to questions that he was asking or assist him in the things that he needed help with. Right.
Yeah. That's great. And I love it because I was literally going to say like iRobot with Will Smith. I mean, that's where my brain goes with artificial intelligence. So I love that because, it's certainly been a theme in some of those things, and to see it turn into some sort of reality is truly fascinating. So kind of on that, I guess, how have we seen AI evolve in the past decade or so? So obviously, like with each of you, Meg, you're still in school, Jake, full in your career, so you're at different phases. I guess for each of you, I'm curious how you've seen that evolve in the past decade, with you being in different phases. What are we seeing there in terms of advancements?
I'll go first. For me, as more of the student role, I think this applies to both, but the capabilities overall went from like simple data analysis to more complex, and you can have like human-like interactions with AI now, which I think is something that was not the case 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And then the big piece is just accessibility. I think companies like ChatGPT have made it really accessible, especially for students, for employees, for everyone, to just create a free account and you can use AI, whereas it used to be just businesses or, Jake, as you said, like billionaires like Tony Stark.
Yeah. I'll kind of take it up off that thread. So yeah, for me, I think like the first, iterations of these things that I saw was kind of more in the machine learning phase of like looking at how, like Apple or Google were starting to make their devices like predictive of like, oh, this is kind of what your day is. So let's give you this suggestion of, this piece of information or what we think would be relevant. And of course, you do see it in like the algorithms that are playing out in social media. Like that's definitely a lot of pattern matching and very interesting as well, because you can predict a lot about what human behavior might be based on certain choices. Just, I think there was one metric where Facebook basically said, if you take this survey, we'll have a very good understanding of what your social proclivities might be, as well as like how you might vote and all these other things. And they kind of ran some studies against people who note or like in your inner circle, like your best friends or family and friends. And the algorithm is able to predict more realistically, like what that person might do behaviorally versus their family and friends, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is very crazy. And so kind of going off of that, it has become so much more accessible. We see it in multiple facets in our lives, some areas I would say in our lives that maybe most people don't even realize that we're engaging with it as much as we are. So what are some common like misconceptions or myths around AI that we should know about? Jake, I'll kind of start with you. Like, what are you seeing that we maybe need to kind of debunk around this whole idea of artificial intelligence?
Well, first, we're not at the stage of AGI, which is like artificial general intelligence, where basically the AI is able to learn and self-teach itself all these skills. And, we're not like worried about it taking over the world in any way. But I guess like the misconception I think is like people think that there's like an intelligence that it's not conscious in any way, but also the intelligence isn't the same as ours in the sense that like for artificial intelligence, what it's really doing is it's crafting answers based on probabilistic ideas of what the next best word would be in a response. And it's just like running crazy probability on what it should say next. And it's basically giving you your answer one word at a time. And it's not actually reasoning in a lot of ways. And even the most capable models that have just come out of ChatGPT, those have reasoning, so to speak, but it's actually still just doing a lot more of what it's already been doing in a way that's even more helpful, but it's not reasoning in the same way that we are.
Yeah. Okay. Meg, how about you? What are some, myths or so that you've kind of heard around AI?
I'd say a big one at this stage in my life is that AI will replace all jobs, which I think is a big misconception that people have. I think AI definitely enhances human jobs and human efforts, but it's not something that can or will ever replace human interaction. As Jake said, like it can't run without guidance. As someone who's worked on the back ends of constructing GPTs, I know all too well that you need to tell the GPT exactly what you want very specifically in order for it to work. And then even then, it still needs more feedback. It's not something that could run by itself. It's not something that could replace a human being, which I think is important. And then also some people who might be afraid of technology or AI in general, like AI is not something that has a mind of its own. It's not conscious. It's all about what data it's trained on. So it's not something that could like turn evil or turn bad. It's all about human input and human interaction.
Right. Yeah. No, that's huge because I think it's kind of explaining it. There's a lot of ways to get false information out there around this topic. So I think it's so helpful to kind of help people see the reality of what it really truly looks like. So as we've said, with AI becoming increasingly accessible to really just about everyone, whereas, we mentioned before it being kind of more an exclusive thing. Now it is available to just about everyone. How are we seeing this shift impact education specifically? What do you guys think? Meg, for you, I guess we start there with you being in school still. How are you seeing that impact education?
I think there are pros and cons. So for pros, it allows more time to focus on those critical thinking skills and problem solving skills, because with things like I want to create a study plan for myself, or I want to create a practice test for myself, I can type up exactly what I need to learn, what I want to learn, and it will pop out 20 questions for me, which I think is really important. But on the other side, I think it's also important not to lean too much on AI and to use it more as a tool instead of relying on it completely. And on top of that, another con would be academic integrity, which I think a lot of colleges, high school students start facing. But if you can round all that out, it's an incredible tool that you can use throughout your educational journey, especially if maybe you run into a problem that you're struggling with that usually you would get discouraged and give up on. It's a good tool that can help you get over that speed bump and keep learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So Jake, I'm curious on your perspective here, because you obviously work with lots of students and lots of families, but also other educators. So how are you seeing this shift, impact education?
I think it's an amazing tool, and kind of going on what we said before, there's no way that AI will replace, I think, teachers or educators, because the best way to put it is like AI is all brain and no heart. And a huge part of education, I think, is like learning resilience and kind of having someone to deal with the social and emotional aspects of learning, because it is really easy to get frustrated, to want to give up, to do all those things. And I think, even more so now, the role of educators needs to be focused on giving students that support system to say like, okay, you didn't get it today, but we're going to keep working on it. And also we have this cool, really interesting tool. So when I'm not here, like when it comes to exploring certain knowledge or repackaging it, we can use this tool to make it easier for you to try and understand something. An interesting trick with AI is sometimes you can take like a concept that might be really difficult for you and you can give it information about yourself. Like, hey, I play soccer, or I really enjoy volleyball. Can you explain this in terms of like how this might be related in a volleyball metaphor or something like that? Like that is an interesting thing that you can, force it to do. I think the other piece, like kind of what Meg said, with academic integrity, there's an issue that where students might just lean on this to do work for them, and I think that's something that I really strongly caution all the students that I work with against, and also all of our educators, like telling them like, hey, you can't do this because not because you like actually physically can't do it, but you can't do this because in the long run, what you're doing is you're sacrificing your own ability to figure these things out, to be able to operate on your own. And there's that whole argument of like, oh, when will I ever be without a calculator, right? Why should I learn this if I always have a calculator? Or like, why should I learn to do, the XYZ task when I have AI? And I think that the, important thing to take away from that is that, well, AI is not as capable as you think it is. And it's really reliant on your ability to interpret what it's telling you, because you can't have a good conversation. You can have a really intelligent conversation with AI, but you can't have a good conversation with it about a topic you know nothing about. So you have to like do the work to understand even what it's saying to you. And I think a really big part of what this tool opens up to is like the curiosity and question asking. I think like if students can really like master that topic with an AI and translate that to the real world where they're asking questions about things that they don't understand, and being able to just like be curious and have no question sort of be off limits and get used to that as a default, I think that can be one of the ways that AI would really like help the space of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whole concept of or discussion around academic integrity, I mean, that's always been there. It's just the tools have changed, right? Like there's always been ways around that. It's just there's new tools. So it's kind of learning to navigate the new tools. I mean, it was something different. Yeah. 20 years ago, Spark Notes, but like now totally different, but it's still kind of that same idea of like it still helping reframe the mindset of like, why am I learning this information? Am I benefiting myself by taking these shortcuts or utilizing them in a way that's like you've mentioned, Jake, that's going to help propel me forward. So let's talk about benefits, right? So how is AI beneficial to students? I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about maybe some ways that you see them being able to utilize and maximize really the effectiveness of what these tools have.
Let Meg start.
I'd say for me personally, specifically in my role as a TA and specifically in an intro level class, I saw a lot of students, and this was a couple of years ago, but I saw a lot of students who would get really stuck and get really discouraged. And if I wasn't holding office hours, they would give up. And I think that's a big problem, especially in high school when you're just figuring out who you are as a student, and in college when you're figuring out where you want to go and which path to go down. I think it's incredibly important to not give up when you get stuck. And one of the large benefits of AI is that you can ask all these questions to find the right answer, or the bad side would be you rely on it. But the pro of this would be if I get stuck and I'm doing my homework and there's no office hours and I run into a problem, and I can ask this wonderful tool, okay, what's my next step? Instead of saying, oh, how do I complete this assignment? Okay, what's my next step? How do I get over this hurdle so that I can keep going? Which I think is huge for students. And the fact that when you do figure out all these answers and you ask all these questions, you're deepening your learning. And then on top of that, when you need to, I know for me personally, when I need to study for a test, I don't want to take an hour of time that I could be using to study to write out practice problems for myself or create a study plan or here's what I need to do. Instead, I can think about that on my own and keep up with those critical thinking skills and then use the tool to create practice problems for myself and deepen my study plan instead of, I would say overall, you can work smarter, not harder without relying on the tech itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jake, how about you? What are some benefits you see?
I have some out of the box benefits because
awesome.
I feel like I spend a lot of time talking to AI and just like doing weird things and trying to see what it'll do. And I think that there's like one of the huge benefits, and this is an application that has just gotten a lot of updates. Google's Notebook LM. Basically, they allow you to put in a ton of information. You can put in like several books and have conversations with those books and like explore some of them like main ideas. And something that I actually like to do is take some of my my favorite authors and like push them into these knowledge bases and then try to have a conversation with their ideas and then say like, oh, well, how would this person maybe critique what I'm saying or what I'm thinking? And then also be like, okay, well, this author might agree with me, but what about this other author? Like, what would they say? Can you take that perspective? Gemini, since we're, whatever you want to call the different AIs, if you're going to call them by their model names, but like you can go in and like have these interesting conversations with big ideas from authors or, things like that, or research papers, things like that. There's also a benefit that I heard about recently that I was like, oh, I hadn't thought to do that. And it's actually, I think, more of a useful thing for males because we don't often socialize or talk about our problems as much. And I think that, being able to talk about what you're going through, how your day is going, and express all of this, and then maybe say like, are there maybe some things that I could do to solve these problems that I'm having? And like, it could just give you some ideas as to, brainstorm solutions of this is what might help. Or you can, also ask it to poke holes in your thinking. Be like, is there anything that I'm maybe overreacting about? Or I just told you all these things and I said, if this happens, then that would happen, and then that would happen. And then maybe you could get some grounding and, have the AI say like, well, what is the actual probability of those things happening? And in sequence, it seems very unlikely, right? Like that it can be in a way, just someone to talk to and kind of like examine your thoughts, I guess is the best way to put it, and have it think about those, give you some logical aspects of, what someone might say in response to those things. And you don't actually have to have that conversation with someone if it's something that's private and you don't have an outlet for it or something like that.
That's fascinating. I've definitely not thought about utilizing it in that way. So cool. So, okay. So positives, but I think that as with everything, there always can be some sort of negative side. So I'm curious, do you see any potential negative impacts to AI? Let's talk like specifically to education. What are some negative impacts that you could foresee happening here?
I think for sure over-reliance on AI is a big one, especially in students, just because it is such a cool tool and so helpful. And it's easy to go down the path of, oh, this did my homework for me in 5 minutes when it would take me an hour. So I think that's a huge thing to look out for. And you need to be mindful when using any sort of AI that it is a tool that coincides with what you are doing, not replaces your effort. And then on top of that, sometimes it's wrong, and you need to know how to figure that out and how to know when it's wrong and how to then turn it around and find the right answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I second that. I feel like I definitely can't say like, do not let these things do your homework for you in any way. They will tell you the wrong answer in a very convincing way. And that's kind of like part of the issue is that they're built to give answers in a way that sounds, it's persuasive. It's meant to sound credible, sound like somebody who knows what they're talking about. And I think that's like kind of a bigger problem for students and, even for society is like this idea of like, oh, like I asked a question and whatever the answer I got, like taking that for granted, taking that at face value. I think something that you have to push back against is basically lazy thinking. And that's already a problem, right? We Google things and we're like, what a first, search result that comes through Google, we're saying, oh yeah, that must be the right answer. And the same problem is going to, arise with AI feeding that wrong answer to you in a very convincing format and maybe even citing sources, but it's citing the sources in the wrong way. It like hallucinated and decided that it was going to interpret that source a different way. And particularly in the context of very nuanced conversations or nuanced interpretations of things, it can make those mistakes. So there's no replacement for critical thinking. You really have to examine what this is telling you and where it's getting its data from. And that's just like, I feel like that goes back to my middle school, high school, college days, and the librarian saying, you need credible sources. You need to make sure that whatever you're citing sources from is trustworthy. And that's a really hard problem to solve. And I think AI was not going to make it that much easier. But one of the things that I do like about certain applications, like I use Perplexity AI, which is basically an AI search engine, and it will search like 10 different websites about my question and look through and give me an answer based on 10 different sources. But then I can go and examine those sources. Even if I was like, okay, this answer seems a little off, or maybe I liked it because it supported my viewpoint, but then I can go and go into the sources and look at those things myself. I mean, obviously that does create another problem, which is like, okay, those are the pre-selected sources. Now we have certain sources that are being preferenced, and what sources do we preference? Like, these are going to be difficult problems to solve, and they do have negative impacts if you have people kind of thinking the world exists in a certain way, but it actually doesn't, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So like, I think that's definitely a problem that everyone has to think about and work on solutions to.
Right. Yeah. It's so funny because I've thought about this so many times. Like I remember, my freshman year of high school, we had to take a research class. Right. And I remember thinking kind of at the time as a typical freshman in high school, like, when am I going to use this? Like, this seems kind of like a waste of my time. And I had no idea how relevant, even more so. It was relevant back then, of course, but I mean, like, just the increasing need to be able to decipher and understand the importance of true research and being able to kind of sift through just with where we are today is so valuable and so needed. So those are really great things to kind of think on. So I want to talk kind of specifically for parents. I know personally, knowing a lot of parents and who have expressed concerns around the impacts of AI specifically to education. So maybe for parents who have felt concerned about their students having to navigate the reality of AI really being so accessible throughout their whole education journey, what would you say are some tips or, some advice that we can kind of help them just really set their students up for success in this area?
I think first, it's super important to become knowledgeable on it as a parent, because I know students probably have more exposure to AI in their everyday lives, whereas parents might not. And I think in order to have conversations with your student about AI, it's important for you to know about it first. So for me, in my day-to-day, I use AI to make lift plans, or I'll use AI to make my meal plans for me. And that's something that you can throw into your day-to-day that will get you familiar with the tool. And then going off of that, once you are familiar with how it works and what it can do and what it shouldn't do, you can have those conversations with your student about setting boundaries, how it should not be a shortcut to your homework, but instead a tool that you can use with it. Even something so simple as like a screen time boundary could work. And then just also encouraging on the side those problem solving and critical thinking skills, either through sports or through other various ways, is something that's super important. And then on top of that, overall, I think for high school, college age is just digital literacy. So knowing or having that conversation with your student on when to know if something's wrong, or when to know all the different parts of a digital footprint and that kind of thing, I think are first steps to having those conversations. And again, just a conversation with your student, I think, is going to be the biggest part, because they don't know until you talk about it.
Right. Absolutely. And I totally agree. I think that almost in a similar way of kind of the social media discussion with your kids. And I think that what I've seen so much is it's a unique place for so many parents, because this is a certain area when it comes to really anything technological that parents have a hard time being able to say, oh, I can relate to it this way, or I can relate to when I was your age in this specific way, because that just didn't exist. So I think that it is a big kind of fear and struggle in some ways, because in so many other ways in parenting, you can say, yeah, I remember being 12, or I remember studying for tests, or I can relate to the struggle in balancing sports and extracurriculars. But when it comes to these things, there's not really a frame of reference to go back and say, I understand what that was like. And I think that leaves some parents kind of grasping at straws at times. So I really resonate with you saying that knowledge is one of the greatest tools there. And I've had conversation with parents about even social media, same thing. Like, you have to educate yourself on what it is. And yeah, you honestly, your kids are probably going to know a lot more about it than you do. And that's okay. I think that though, having that knowledge is one of the kind of that initial tool in your tool belt to really use. So Jake, how about you? What do you think?
I agree. I think developing a knowledge of the tool yourself, using it, and kind of getting that, baseline understanding of what's going on is certainly helpful. And then I think the other piece, not just like the conversation, definitely it needs to be an open conversation. It almost like needs to be a conversation about like, who's that friend that you invited over? Like, what are you guys doing? Like that kind of thing, like understanding, like, how are they using the tool? Like, what are the ways that they incorporate it into their day-to-day life, and kind of like having conversations around that. And also, like being there, maybe in some cases, like if it's possible, like using it together to like actually get the benefits of it. Because there are, appropriate ways to use the tool, and there's like a lot that people haven't figured out in terms of how to use it optimally. And if you guys can make a project of working on it together and being like, oh, well, we could actually do things, in a much better way, or even have a better conversation with this tool, then you both benefit. You're learning together. It's kind of a shared experience that you can have. And I think actually, just saying that, like, it is a shared experience that you can have. Like, we don't, have a frame of reference of, what was it like when you were in middle school and you had these tools? Like we didn't, but we can kind of like grow together and have those experiences together, and let it be part of a conversation and an open dialogue.
Creating like the shared experience now, right? I love that. That's such a great way to look at it. Some really good advice. Okay, well, as we kind of wrap up here, we want to hear your simplified lessons, and I want to make these AI specific today. So for each of you, we'll maybe start with Meg. If you had to simplify, one of the most important lessons that you've had to learn in working with AI, that you wouldn't mind sharing, what would be that you can kind of help others learn this more quickly?
I think for me, my lesson would be just approaching it with curiosity and openness. As we've talked about, I think the potential is huge and very helpful, but you also have to keep learning and adapting as the technology evolves, because again, 2 years ago is very different from where we are now. So you have to keep learning alongside it. But it can be a super valuable tool if you know how to use it.
For me, I think it's actually getting really specific with what you want to know and or what you want the tool to do for you. So like taking a lot of time to think about good questions and how to structure questions in a way that you can get answers that are going to be useful to you. I think that's like one of the ways that you can maximize the potential of the tool. And then going back and like, if you didn't like an answer, say you didn't like the answer and ask for a different like explanation or ask for it to do different things. Because I think that's where a lot of people like kind of just stop. They're just like, oh, I asked it to write my weekly schedule or write a business plan or whatever it is. They like give it a one-line question and then they expect it to solve life's problems. And that's not really going to work. You have to put in the work to get good results.
Wonderful. That's great. I loved, having this conversation today. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. And I think this will be, really beneficial. So thanks so much. We'll see you. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe to our show for future episodes. See you next time.